So welcome to Jumbo IS and welcome to our lecture series called Daily News in Shorts. In this lecture series, we cover a particular day's current affairs in a short span of time. Now revise this lecture just after watching it because just watching it won't allow you to remember these current affairs for longer periods of time. You'll quickly forget them. So revise it from the notes provided by us, and these notes are shared on our Telegram channel. The link to our Telegram channel is provided in the comment section below this video. All right. Now, without further introduction, let's straight away jump into the lecture. All right, so let's begin. So daily current affairs, 9th of October, Thursday. And here is the list of topics that we shall discuss today. Okay, so we will continue with this series of discussing Nobel Prizes. Okay, we discussed Nobel Prize in Physiology, then Physics, and now it's the turn for Chemistry. So we will talk about Nobel Prize in Chemistry for the year 2025. Okay, then the second topic is related to London Consensus. You must have studied about Washington Consensus, but many in the developed world, okay, developed countries, they are saying that Washington Consensus has failed the population of these developed countries. Therefore, we need a new consensus, okay? And that is the London Consensus, the new prescription, the new economic order that the West is pushing. So what is this London Consensus? We'll talk about this. And third topic is Renewables surpass coal. For the first time ever in the entire world, electricity produced from renewable energy has surpassed that of coal. Okay, electricity produced by thermal power plants, coal-based power plants. Renewable energy produces more electricity than coal. So this is good news. So we will talk about this entire thing. Then we will talk about this thing in the Indian context. What is the situation in India? Okay, so these are the three topics that we shall zero in our attention on. Okay. Today's lecture is not going to be that long. Only three topics are of significance. The first topic is related to science and tech portion of our UPSC syllabus. The second topic is related to economics portion of our UPSC syllabus. And the third topic is also related to economics as well as environment portion of our UPSC syllabus. Okay, so these are the three topics. Let's start discussing them one by one, starting with topic number one, and that is Nobel Prize in Chemistry. Okay. You see, we all know that Nobel Prizes are being announced, okay? First it was medicine, then physics, then chemistry, then it would be literature, and then finally peace, Nobel Peace Prize. Now the thing is that, well, let me explain why this Nobel Prize has been given to these three people for chemistry, okay? The thing is that we all know about atoms, we all know about molecules, right? Molecules are basically made up of atoms. Now, generally, these atoms are so tightly placed that there is little empty space between them, right? Now, these three scientists basically created those molecules which had a lot of empty space between them, right? These things were created. Now, all these molecules have a lot of empty space between the atoms, and this can be used to basically absorb gases, absorb water, absorb chemicals, and many other applications come out of this. Okay, this is a significant discovery, and that is why these three people are awarded Nobel Prize in Chemistry. Okay, so we will talk about this thing, this molecule that has so much empty space, and then we'll talk about its significance. Okay, what are the applications that were generated out of these molecules that were created, artificially created? Clear? We will focus only on these two things. So pay close attention. All right. Okay, then let's begin. Nobel Prize in Chemistry. So what was in the news? First, let's talk about this. So in most materials, atoms and molecules are packed tightly together, okay, leaving little or no empty space between them. This year's Nobel Prize in Chemistry has been awarded to three scientists, Susumu Kitagawa, Richard Robson, and Omar Yagi. Okay, he's from Japan, Kitagawa, Richard Robson, mostly from America, and Omar Yagi is from Jordan. Okay, in creating special molecular constructions, okay, special types of molecules. These molecules were called metal organic frameworks, MOFs. And the special thing about MOFs is that there is so much empty space between metals in this, atoms in this, okay, which has a lot of useful applications. We'll talk about those useful applications, but first you need to understand the basic point, okay? They artificially created these molecules called MOFs in which there is a lot of empty space between the atoms, okay? Let's take a look at the diagram of this MOF, okay, metal organic framework. So this is how this metal organic framework looks like, okay. This orange thing, this orange circle, okay, is basically made up of a metal ion, okay, metal ion. So a metal atom is there. Ion, positively charged or negatively charged atom is there. Okay. So there is a metal atom, and these metal atoms are linked through organic linkers, organic compounds. Okay. So these organic compounds act as linkers. They link these metal atoms, and then these circles are metal atoms. Now they created different types of shapes. Now all these different types of shaped, differently shaped molecules are known as metal organic frameworks. Now the special part about them is, or special feature that these molecules possess, is that there is a lot of empty space between these atoms. There is a lot of empty space that is left. Because of this empty space within this molecule, which is rare, which is quite rare in other molecules, but because of this empty space, they have certain key properties. They have high porosity. They act like a sponge. Like a sponge absorbs water, they also have high porosity. Okay, large internal surface area, vast ordered crystalline networks. They are crystal shaped. Okay, proper geometrical shapes, like this is a cuboid, and like a sponge with highly controlled cages and pores. So these empty spaces act as pores where you can hide different types of gases, materials. Make sense? So this is a metal organic framework. That's about it. Now, why is this metal organic framework useful? What are the applications? Okay, what usages can be extracted out of this discovery? Well, there were certain usages. Okay, so what are these usages? So what are the applications? These molecules can act as gas storage and separation. The high surface area and tunable pore sizes. I mean, you can increase the empty space or decrease it. Tunable pore sizes are ideal for capturing and storing gases like hydrogen, methane, and carbon dioxide. So they can act as storage areas for gases. Okay. Then, you know what a catalyst is? Catalysts basically aid in a chemical reaction. Now, because of their special feature, well, MOFs can act as catalysts or serve as host for nanoparticles that can act as catalysts. So you can take these nanoparticles, which are catalysts, and hide them in these MOFs. And the chemical reaction can also take place in these MOFs. So they help in catalysis, because of which many chemical reactions can be done. All right. Then they can be used for drug delivery also, because they are so porous, you can hide or store drugs, okay, medicines in them, and then deliver them to the human body or any particular organ in human body. Their porous nature allows them to encapsulate and deliver drugs, making them useful in biomedical applications and sensing and imaging. MOFs can be designed to detect specific chemicals or act as contrast agents in bioimaging. So they can be used for scans, CT scans and all. So these are some of the applications. Now these are useful applications. That is why these people were given Nobel Prize in Chemistry. Okay, that's about it. That's all we need to know. All right. Now let's quickly jump forward to second news item, which is quite important, and important from the perspective of your economic syllabus. And this is called the London Consensus. Now listen to me very carefully. You see, in 1990s, particularly 1990, well, it was felt that all the economies of the world should follow certain principles, should follow certain economic principles for the world to progress, for more development, for more progress. These 10 principles have to be followed. Now, back in 1990, every economy was different. Some were following communist system, socialist system, capitalist system, plus there were various different types of variations also. Now, the idea was that all economies should follow these 10 principles. Like, right? So some of these principles were, there should be more liberalization of the business, more ease of doing business, more globalization, more privatization. Okay, privatized state-owned companies. These are some of the principles. Reduce your fiscal deficit. Every economy should follow these 10 principles so that the entire world moves forward. Okay. Now, this set of 10 principles or the 10 commandments for all economies of the world was known as the Washington Consensus. Now, there is a reason why it was called the Washington Consensus. First and foremost, it was pushed by USA and think tanks in USA. Then second, it was majorly pushed by the developed countries, because developing countries were following different systems, including India. India was a bit socialist before 1991. But the developed countries, the developed West, was pushing more liberalization, privatization, globalization. Okay, they gave this idea of Washington Consensus, and they were pushing this idea, these set of 10 principles, to all the economies of the world. Make sense? Clear? And most of the economies followed these 10 principles. Basically, international institutions like World Bank and IMF also basically connected their aid and financial assistance with these 10 principles only. IMF said that I will give you financial aid only if you follow these 10 commandments. It happened with India also. Okay. Well, in 1991, India's economy was on the verge of bankruptcy. It required financial aid from IMF. IMF said, do these reforms, only then I will give you this aid. India did those reforms. Those reforms are called LPG, liberalization, privatization, globalization. You must have heard about them, right? So India did LPG, India got money from IMF. IMF did that with all the other countries. So the way West was pushing these 10 principles was also by strong arming other economies through IMF. IMF made it mandatory. Make sense? So most economies of the world started following these principles. Then what happened? Well, in 2007 and 8, global financial crisis happened. And this global financial crisis basically destroyed developed world more than developing countries. In fact, developed countries fell a little, and developing countries like India, China, Brazil, mostly BRICS countries, they rose and they took advantage of this Washington consensus. And slowly and gradually, economic situation in developed countries started to deteriorate. So much so that there was this popular sentiment against Washington consensus, right? Today in USA, UK, Europe, people are against Washington consensus. And that is why now the developed countries are pushing for another consensus. Okay, another set of economic principles. They are saying, abandon Washington consensus. Now we are giving you a new set of economic principles, and these are called London consensus, or this set of principles is called London consensus. Okay, so first we'll talk about what this Washington consensus is, what was its impact, why did its popularity drop so quickly, and what is this new London consensus. Okay, we'll talk about all these things. So pay close attention. This is important. A question can be asked in your examination. Okay, all right. So the London consensus. So first let's talk about Washington consensus. Okay. So as many as 55 leading international economists today have drafted London consensus as an alternative to the outdated Washington consensus. Now, what was Washington consensus? Washington consensus was a set of 10 economic policy prescriptions, okay, economic policy principles considered in 1990s given by British economist John Williamson. So remember this person's name. John Williamson basically gave Washington consensus. Okay. Now, what were these 10 principles? Okay, 10 pillars of Washington consensus. Let's talk about them. So, first of all is fiscal discipline. What do you mean by fiscal discipline? Well, the first economic principle is reduce your fiscal deficit. This is bad because the more fiscal deficit you will have, the more debt you will have. And the more debt you will have, more macroeconomic instability you will have. So, first principle was fiscal discipline. Then, second principle was prioritize public expenditure, which means that currently government's expenditure was more focused on subsidies and other types of payments to people. Well, Washington consensus says that government's expenditure should be channelized more towards infrastructure, public assets, okay, education, health, more towards education, health, public assets, roads, bridges and all, rather than mere subsidies. So prioritize public expenditure. Number 3 is tax reform. Okay, reduce taxes so that more and more people give taxes. So your tax base widens. Tax revenue also increases. Side by side, well, people are also less burdened. The economy is less burdened. Companies are less burdened and ease of doing business increases. So tax reforms was third principle. Then decontrol and deregulate interest rates. Most economies back then in 1990, including India, well, followed regulated interest rates. RBI used to decide what interest rates banks can charge. Today, that is not the case. Today, market decides the interest rates. That is what was meant by, well, that is what Washington consensus meant. Decontrol and deregulate interest rates. Make them market oriented. Okay. And last, competitive exchange rates. Dollar rupee, dollar pound exchange rates should be decided based on market. Okay. Follow this. Okay. Then other 5 principles, well, trade liberalization, liberalize import-export trade, Allow foreign companies to enter your economies so that more foreign direct investment comes to you. Privatize state-owned enterprises, so privatization. Deregulation of business, increase ease of doing business, okay? And uphold property rights, right to register property. Property rights should be enhanced. Now, India implemented most of these reforms in 1991. These reforms in India collectively were called LPG, liberalization, privatization, globalization. And most economies of the world, they followed these 10 principles in some degree or the other. Clear? Make sense? So this was Washington Consensus. Very clear and cut, very non-vague, okay? Clear principles that every economy should follow. Now, what was the impact of this Washington Consensus? Okay, what happened when countries started to implement these 10 principles? Well, first of all, this Washington Consensus, though initially pushed by the developed countries, West, gained widespread credibility, okay? And because most countries started following Washington Consensus also includes trade liberalization. So this led to hyper-globalization post-1990. The world became more globalized, okay? Then, this Washington Consensus also got support from Bretton Woods institutions. What are Bretton Woods institutions? You all know this. You all should know this. IMF, International Monetary Fund, and World Bank, they are collectively known as Bretton Woods institutions. They were also pushing for Washington Consensus. In fact, IMF made it a conditional requirement. Washington Consensus was a conditional requirement for receiving aid package from IMF, financial aid from IMF. Okay. Then what happened? The world started globalizing. Developing countries like India and China started to grow. Brazil started to grow. South Africa grew, right? And everyone was happy until 2007 and 8, when global financial crisis came to US and then hit the entire developed world. UK, US, Canada, Australia, Europe. Okay? And well, after global financial crisis, well, economic situation in these developed countries started to deteriorate. So much so that there was this very high level of backlash against Washington Consensus within these countries. People started rebelling against this. And many politicians like Donald Trump capitalized on this. Okay, and that is why people voted for Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is clearly anti-Washington Consensus. Okay, so many populist leaders got elected, came to power in developed countries. Clearly, this received a severe backlash in the Western countries. But it did not receive backlash in countries like India and China. Because of this Washington Consensus, well, BRICS countries grew, their power, their economic clout increased. Okay, in fact, there was this perception in the West that Washington Consensus is benefiting developing countries more than developed countries. And that is why maybe developed countries have now become anti-Washington Consensus. And now they have proposed a new consensus. And that new set of economic principles is called London Consensus. Now, in London Consensus, there are these 5 principles. Okay, so what are these 5 principles? Let's talk about this. London Consensus. So first of all, London Consensus says that rather than focusing solely on GDP and economic growth, make sure that your GDP also benefits the well-being of people. Focus on human development, welfare of people, rather than mere GDP numbers. So this is principle number 1. Then principle number 2, make growth matter. Focus on that economic growth that benefits the people. Okay, normal economic growth, which is increasing inequality, is bad. Make sure that your growth is also used for welfare needs. So this is make growth matter. Then build resilience. COVID was a huge wake-up call. People's lives got destroyed because of this, economic lives. Therefore, state should focus on building resilience. Government should focus on building resilience, economic resilience, as well as building resilience for the households. So that in future, there is a 1 in a million or once in a century crisis like COVID. State has the capacity to help various households, poor, vulnerable households, to basically ride this wave of crisis. Clear? So build resilience. And fourth, basically, put politics first. Basically, Washington Consensus ignored politicians and favored economic technocrats. That technocrats would decide better policies. But now they have realized their mistake. And London Consensus says that politicians should be taken along. Because as you all know, populist political leaders like Donald Trump have have basically led this movement against Washington Consensus. So the new consensus should take all politicians on board. And last principle is invest in state capacity, state institutions, financial institutions, they should be robust, legal institutions, they should be robust so that people's trust in these institutions is high. Make sense? So these are the 5 principles. Clear? This is what London Consensus is. Developed countries are saying abandon Washington Consensus and capitalize on or follow London Consensus. They have given this London Consensus. But many people are already criticizing London Consensus. Basically, they have a few things that they have to say. Okay. So what are the limitations of London Consensus? First of all, can you spot some difference between Washington and London? Both these consensuses. Well, if we take a look at Washington Consensus, it was proper, prim and proper and clearly understandable targets. Fiscal deficit should be less, tax reforms should be there. These prescriptions were clear and simple. Whereas in London Consensus, don't you think these principles are a little vague, lofty? Okay, focus on well-being. What is well-being? Make growth matter. What do you mean by that? Right? These principles are vague because they are not clearly defined. People are saying that they won't be followed properly. Okay, this is one criticism. But basically, the authors of London Consensus are saying that we have deliberately made it vague because we do not want to create one size fits all policy. That means 10 principles like Washington Consensus, these 10 principles are good for everyone. That is never the case. So we have deliberately kept these 5 principles vague so that everyone can interpret them according to their own needs. We do not want one size fits all. Basically, the one size fits all approach of Washington Consensus led to its failure. So this is the response to the criticism that is leveled against Washington Consensus. That's all you need to know. Very simple to understand. Okay. And now let's quickly shift our focus to third news item, and that is renewables surpass coal. So there is this think tank in United Kingdom, UK, Britain. Okay. It's called Ember. And it recently came out with a report. As per this report, globally, we are not talking about India, globally, electricity produced from renewable energy has surpassed electricity produced from coal. Now, this is good news for all climate change activists because renewable energy doesn't release any greenhouse gas emissions, okay, doesn't lead to any greenhouse gas emissions, whereas coal does, burning coal does. So this is good news. So basically, this news item is all about that. So as per this report by Ember, well, there are a few features that were highlighted in this report. Okay, there were a few things that were said in this report, which are important for us to understand. Then we'll try to understand the state of renewable energy in India. Ember basically talked about global renewable energy sector, right? But we will zero in on India because questions can be asked from there as well. Okay. And then we'll talk about what are the limitations to India's renewable energy sector. So we'll focus on all these 3 things. Clear? So first, let's talk about what did this Ember report say. Okay. So renewables surpass coal. So what was in the news? The first half of this year, that is 2025, saw something significant. For the first time ever, renewable energy eclipsed coal as the world's leading source of electricity. Okay, as per Ember. In India too, non-fossil fuel sources in the country accounted for 50.1% of its installed electricity. Okay. In 2015, basically, as per Paris Climate Agreement, India gave a commitment. India said that 50% of our India said that 40% of our electricity would come from non-fossil fuels. Then India increased this target to 50%. India said that we will achieve this by 2030, but India has already achieved this. So this is all a good news. Okay. Now, some of the key features of this Ember report. Okay. So solar and wind outpace demand growth. Basically, they are saying of all the renewable energies that there are, geothermal energy, solar, wind, and many others, solar and wind have the maximum demand. Okay. Then, demand for coal-based electricity declined in both China and India. Coal fell in both China and India, but Ember says that the dip in India is temporary, can bounce back. Demand for coal can increase anytime in future. But dip in demand for coal in China is more structural. So China is doing better than us as far as reducing demand for coal. That's what they said. Plus, power sector, electricity generation sector contributes a lot towards greenhouse gas emissions. But because there was reduction in fossil fuel based electricity, well, greenhouse gas emissions also plateaued. They also reduced. Declines in China and India reflected clean generation growth outpacing demand, though, well, the countries who lecture us a lot on climate change, like European Union and USA, well, their emissions growth did not decline. Okay, ours did, China and India's did. Nonetheless, this was the fact reported by them. Now, let's now focus on India. So what is the situation in India? India's renewable surge. So India's total installed capacity stood at 485 gigawatts. 485 gigawatts of electricity generation capacity we have, of which renewables, solar, wind, small hydro, biogas accounted for 185. Okay. Now this is renewable, solar, wind, small hydro, biogas. By the way, large hydro and nuclear are not considered a part of renewable, but they are non-fossil fuel based. If we add large hydro and nuclear, total non-fossil fuel based electricity reaches 50.1% of the total installed capacity. There is declining share of thermal. Thermal power, mostly coal and gas based, made up remaining 242 gigawatts, 49.9% share. In 2015, thermal power share was 70%. It has declined to around 50%. That's good. Decline of 20% in the last 10 years. That's good. Emissions have also declined. Clear? We have talked about India's Paris promise, 40 or 50% of non-fossil fuel based electricity. Right? Now, this is India's situation. India has really improved as far as renewable energy is concerned. But there are some problems associated with expansion of renewable energy. What are those problems? We have already discussed about these problems in our previous current affairs lectures. Let's talk about them, okay? So, problems with renewables. First of all, you all know that solar and wind are intermittent. That means when the sun is shining, then electricity is produced, but during night time or during cloudy weather, solar energy is not being produced. Similarly, wind energy. When the wind is blowing, wind energy produces electricity. When the wind is not blowing, electricity is not produced. So how to solve for this problem? We have good battery storage. So when the sun is shining, surplus solar energy stored in batteries, and during night time, this battery stored electricity is used to be supplied to the grid for electricity consumption. But what is the problem in India? Well, India lacks good battery storage infrastructure. Because of which, because we do not have good battery storage infrastructure, we are relying on solar and wind, which are intermittent. So our electricity grid is unstable. Plus, that instability in our electricity grid was initially handled by thermal power, coal-based power. But now thermal power is declining. So, base load support, especially during evenings in summers when solar energy is not being produced. That time, the lack of electricity in the electricity grid was handled by thermal, but now thermal share is also declining. So this is a huge problem. We need to quickly spend on battery storage. Okay. Then, well, these electricity companies, electricity distribution companies called DISCOMs, they are suffering from various problems. First of all, they are not distributing electricity properly. The distribution network has so many electricity losses. They're not managing electricity distribution properly. There are so many losses. Plus, they're already bankrupt and they are continuously being bankrolled or bailed out by the government. So taxpayers' money is already being spent on bailing out the bankruptcy of these DISCOMs. This cannot be sustained forever. So these are some of the problems. Make sense? Already government is aware of these problems. That is why government has invested heavily on nuclear. Because nuclear does not produce greenhouse gases. Also, it can provide electricity 24/7. There is no intermittency. And government is also focusing more on battery infrastructure. Nonetheless, this is the state of renewable energy in India. And with that, we conclude today's session. So thank you so much for watching, everyone. And I'm sure it has added value to your preparation. But it will add more value if you're consistent and regular with this lecture series and you revise this lecture from the notes. Okay? On that note, I'll be signing off with the promise of seeing you again with another set of news items. Thank you, everyone.